The morning of February 2nd was like any other. He had been lying when he said that they didn't celebrate birthdays in Ichida culture. He might not have grown up with other Ichidas, but there were manuscripts and hieroglyphs that told him of his people, of the things that they did. His father didn't make any mention of it certainly, though now that he could see without rose-colored glasses, his father didn't make any mention of a lot of things when he asked him. Knuckles had been over the first time he'd hatch. He had vague memories of moonlight and torchlight shining through the cracks of his egg, of Chook going around him and bigger hands picking him up, shooing them away, a blanket wrapped around him. Whoever had held him was blocked from his memory, but the color of peach was a comfort. He did his morning stretches, used the wash basin in the basement to clean his face and comb any loose screws out of his dreadlocks. Then he headed upstairs. It was quiet, but that was no surprise. Knuckles was an early riser, always had been, and he had grown to appreciate the quiet before the dawn. Pulling several of his dreadlocks back to tie them into a ponytail, he stopped in the kitchen, noticing what looked like torchlights outside in the backyard. There was a second's pause before he recognized familiar shapes in the light, and he opened the door, stepping outside. The garden path was lined with firelight, torches standing on either side of the pathway, lighting the way to the sun peeking over the horizon. Tails yawned by Sonic's side, barely awake, and the hedgehog practically vibrated in place when he saw him, waving at him and getting Maddie and Tom's attention towards him as well. Tom was dressed in his sheriff uniform, Maddie holding a small wooden bowl of some kind and smiling at him. Ozzy panted off to the side, tail wagging and dressed in a bowtie. Knuckles would have thought it would a few months ago how much his insides swelled and quelched when he looked at these people. The two Mobians were his brothers. No doubt about that, but there was still part of him that refused to speak of the humans as though they were his parents, even though they had been nothing but to him since Sonic had dragged him for dinner that one night. His mother still existed as long as he lived, and his father, well, he didn't want to dwell on Loke.
What's going on?
He asked, fingers fidgeting a little as he stepped closer, tail twitching behind him. He was cautious. Was this some weird human ritual he hadn't heard about until now? Maddie had mentioned birthdays a week ago or so, and he had thought about it or heard mention of it since.
Well, we thought...
It was my idea.
Sonic interjected Maddie with a whine.
But since it's your birthday today, we would do something that's important to your culture.
Noticing his raised eyebrow, she continued, placing a hand on the hedgehog's shoulder to placate him for a moment.
You said that when Ichidas were of a certain age, they would be put through a series of trials.
Knuckles startled, his eyes widening slightly. He hadn't even had time to prepare anything. Tom interrupted his thoughts, raising a hand from where he had his cup in front of him.
We thought that since you've already been through so much, those were trials enough being tricked and fighting Sonic and Muzz, having your trust taken from you, the real and far more than saving our kids and Tom again, protecting Green Hills.
We all agree that it's more than enough to say or warrior that your ancestors would be proud of.
Bringing up his history with Robotnik was a bit of a sore spot still, and he raised his hand to rub at his arm, suddenly feeling a little awkward. He hated himself for how much he'd been willing to believe a stranger's words, without even trying to sense the Master Emerald's energy. The last sentence out of Tom's mouth made him shake his head, feeling his stomach twist.
I've done so much wrong too,
he said, looking at them unwillingly.
How can you even say they'd be proud of me?
Tom gave him a look with his eyebrows raised, then smiled at him.
Because we are proud of you, and we'd be more than happy to have you be part of our family.
His heart flipped, and he sucked in a breath, like he'd been knocked off his feet. Sonic grinned off to the side, supporting Tails, who snoozed next to him despite himself. The hedgehog nudged him with his foot, causing Knuckles to stumble forward a little as he looked at him, frowning.
Go on,
he said to him, inclining his head to where Tom was putting his hands into the bowl Maddie held. his hands coming away with what looked like white paint. He swallowed and stepped forward, stepping over to Tom, who turned his attention to him again. Maddie stepping back next to her husband with a soft smile of encouragement. Knuckles puffed himself up, letting out a huff of air as he stared at the male human.
Knuckles, you've proven yourself with strength. Weren't you Lily over and over again? You've driven evil out of our town. Do you promise to keep Green Hills at peace?
Some part of him fought with himself to keep from swallowing his tongue.
I promise.
He closed his eyes, feeling Tom's thumbs wipe around the bottom of his eyes and his chin, a finger pressed to his forehead to streak upwards. Maddie smoothed paint against his dreadlocks and around, marking his arms in an elaborate pattern he'd seen before in hieroglyphs. Hal crossed his mind to question, but he didn't ask. Throat dry, Knuckles opened his eyes, glancing to the two humans who looked at him with such warmth he didn't know it was possible.
Then I hereby welcome to the family, Knuckles Rohovsky.
Tom took the hat resting on his head and put it on top of Knuckles, the white brim slightly obscuring them from view before it was fitted properly, and his hand dropped to the edge of his shoulder, squeezing it as Maddie's found his other like they both had done that night his father showed up.
Make us proud, son.
That one word had so much meaning behind it, but coming from Tom, it made him look at them differently, and he swallowed deeply.
I try.
Sonic let out a whoop and Ozzy barked in response, waking Tails from where he had been sleeping and giving a mumbled.
Is it over already?
As he woke, the hedgehog practically bowled him into their parents, plural, so weird, and he looked at him with a raised eyebrow.
Did you like it?
Sonic gushed, unable to help grinning from ear to ear as Tom and Maddie released him from their touch, turning to talk quietly with each other.
How on Mobis did you even?
Well,
Their neighbors nearby were woken by the shrill shrieking of Knuckles yelling at his brother for setting foot on Angle Island, the sound of laughter from the rowdy Wachowskis, Ozzy's barking, and a car alarm going off. They would later receive a card in the mail on an apology letter, letting them know that the Wachowskis had once again welcomed another into the family, and Carl rolled his eyes with a grunt as he slammed his mailbox shut. Well, that had been obvious to everyone in Green Hills, but it was about time. The end.